A city is supposed to make life possible. Streets move people. Apartments shelter families. Factories produce work. Rivers carry food, fuel, and trade. But in 1942, Stalingrad became something else. A modern city on the Volga was torn apart until every room, every stairwell, every basement, and every broken wall became part of a battlefield. In this video, I use modern AI-assisted reconstruction to step inside that frozen city. Not to glorify the battle, and not to turn suffering into spectacle, but to understand what happened when an entire urban world stopped functioning as a city and became a place of smoke, hunger, cold, command decisions, and survival. This is Stalingrad, not as a symbol on a map, but as a place where people lived, worked, hid, fought, waited, froze, and died. Before the battle, Stalingrad was an industrial city stretched along the western bank of the Volga River. It carried the name of Stalin, which gave it enormous political meaning, but it was also a real city of workers, families, tram lines, apartment blocks, workshops, schools, and factories. Its factories produced machinery, steel, and military equipment. Its river connected it to the interior of the Soviet Union. Whoever controlled this city would control more than streets. They would control a psychological prize. By the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany was pushing deep into the Soviet Union. The German advance aimed toward the south, toward oil industry and the Volga. Stalingrad became important because of where it stood, and because of what it represented. For Hitler, taking a city with Stalin's name had symbolic value. For Stalin, losing it was unthinkable. Between those two decisions, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were pulled into a battle that would become one of the most brutal in human history. The destruction began before the close street fighting. In late August 1942, German air attacks hammered Stalingrad. The city was bombed again and again, and entire districts were set on fire. We can reconstruct the scene only in broad terms, but imagine standing on the edge of the Volga and seeing smoke rise from miles of ruined buildings. Warehouses burning, apartment blocks split open, streets blocked with rubble. A city that had taken decades to build was being broken apart in days. But the bombing did not make the city easy to capture. It did something more terrible. It turned Stalingrad into a maze. The ruins became defensive positions. A collapsed wall became cover. A shattered factory became a fortress. A basement became a shelter, a command post, or a trap. The German army had moved across open country with tanks, artillery, and speed. But inside Stalingrad, speed almost disappeared. Streets had to be taken one by one. Buildings had to be cleared floor by floor. Sometimes the front line was not across a field, but across a hallway. This is where the battle changed its character. It was not only army against army. It was architecture against movement. The city itself slowed everything down. Soviet defenders, especially the 62nd Army under General Vasily Chukov, held on inside the ruins with a strategy that forced the fighting extremely close. The closer Soviet positions were to German forces, the harder it became for German artillery and aircraft to strike without risking their own men. This did not make the battle less deadly. It made it more intimate, more exhausting, and more relentless. In places like the Red October factory, the Barrikady gun factory, and the Stalingrad tractor factory, industrial space became battlefield space. These were not romantic settings. They were enormous halls of steel, concrete, broken glass, machinery, smoke, and dust. Soldiers moved through smashed workshops and shell holes. Factory floors that had once held workers and machines now held rifles, ammunition, wounded men, and improvised defenses. There are stories from Stalingrad that became famous later, and some were shaped by wartime propaganda on both sides. That matters. We have to be careful. Not every dramatic account can be confirmed exactly as later told, but the larger truth is beyond dispute. The fighting was close, persistent, and horrifyingly costly. One building could be attacked several times in a single day. A staircase could matter. A window could matter. A hole smashed through a wall could become the safest way to move from one room to the next. The city no longer had normal directions. You did not simply walk down a street. You crossed a killing zone. You did not simply enter a building. You entered a space where the enemy might be above you, below you, or behind the next wall. And beneath all of this, civilians were still there. Many people had not escaped before the battle closed in. Some hid in cellars, basements, drainage spaces, and ruined buildings. Families survived underground while armies fought above them. Food became scarce. Water became dangerous to collect. The air could fill with smoke, dust, and the smell of fire. We cannot know every individual experience, and it would be wrong to pretend we can, but we can say this: Stalingrad was not only a soldier's battle, it was also a civilian catastrophe. The Volga River was the city's lifeline. Soviet reinforcements, ammunition, and supplies had to cross under fire, often by boat, often at night, often through smoke, ice, and chaos. The river that once connected the city to life now became a deadly crossing. Men arriving from the eastern bank might step off a boat and be sent almost immediately into ruins where units were being consumed faster than they could be rebuilt. From the German side, the battle became a test of endurance they had not expected. The Sixth Army, commanded by Friedrich Paulus, had entered the fight expecting another hard but achievable victory. Instead, it was drawn deeper and deeper into urban combat. The German army controlled large parts of the city, but never fully broke Soviet resistance along the river. The closer it came to the Volga, the more costly every step became. By autumn, Stalingrad was a place of fragments. Fragmented buildings, fragmented units, fragmented maps. A commander might control a district on paper, while in reality the enemy still held a cellar, a workshop, or the upper floors of a building. Reports could say a location was taken, then lost, then taken again. The battle became a grinding argument over ruins. Then winter began to close around the city. Cold changed everything. Weapons jammed. Engines failed. Wounded men froze. Clothing, fuel, and shelter became as important as tactics. A soldier could survive bullets and shells, then be defeated by exposure. In Reconstruction, it is tempting to show winter as visually beautiful. Frost on metal, snow falling through broken roofs, pale light over the Volga. But for the people inside Stalingrad, winter was not scenery. It was an enemy. By November 1942, the German army was still locked inside the city, focused on the ruins in front of it. But the real danger was forming outside Stalingrad, on the weaker axis flanks north and south of the city. These lines were held in large part by Germany's allies, including Romanian forces, who were stretched thin and often poorly equipped against a major Soviet armored attack. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Operation Uranus struck the flanks, not the ruined center of the city. This was the turn. While German troops fought in factories and streets, Soviet forces moved around them. Within days, the trap closed. The German Sixth Army and other Axis troops were encircled inside and around Stalingrad. This is the moment the battle changed, from a fight for a city into a fight for survival inside a pocket. The German army inside the encirclement was ordered to hold. A breakout was debated, but Hitler refused to abandon the city. The promise was that the trapped forces could be supplied by air. In reality, the airlift could not deliver what was needed. The numbers required were far beyond what could be reliably flown in under the conditions. Aircraft faced weather, Soviet pressure, distance, and limited capacity. Supplies arrived, but not enough. Food ran low. Ammunition ran low. Fuel ran low. Medical care collapsed. This is where Stalingrad becomes almost impossible to imagine without losing the human scale. Men were not only fighting the Red Army, they were fighting hunger. They were fighting frostbite. They were fighting exhaustion so deep that the body itself began to give up. Horses were slaughtered for food. Units shrank. Command posts moved into basements and ruins. The wounded filled improvised aid stations where doctors had too little of almost everything. The language of strategy, maps and orders becomes very cold when set beside the reality of trapped human beings. And still, the fighting continued. Soviet forces tightened the ring. The German pocket was split. The final positions were crushed gradually, not in one clean moment. On January 31, 1943, Paulus surrendered in the southern pocket. Fighting in the northern pocket continued until February 2. By then, the Sixth Army had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. Stalingrad was over. But the cost was almost beyond comprehension. Exact numbers vary depending on what is counted and how. But the battle produced enormous losses among Soviet forces, Axis forces, and civilians. It left a major city in ruins. It destroyed an entire German field army. It consumed lives at a scale that still feels difficult to measure honestly. The meaning of Stalingrad was not only military. Militarily, it stopped the German advance in the south and marked a decisive shift on the Eastern Front. After Stalingrad, Germany could still fight, and the war would continue with terrible violence for more than 2 years. But something had changed. The aura of unstoppable German victory had been broken. The Soviet Union had shown that it could absorb catastrophic losses, continue fighting, and then strike back with overwhelming force. Psychologically, Stalingrad became a turning point because everyone could see the momentum shifting. In Germany, the defeat was a shock that propaganda could not fully hide. In the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a symbol of endurance and sacrifice around the world. It became proof that the war in the East had entered a new phase. But I think the deeper lesson is more human than strategic. Stalingrad shows what happens when political obsession, military ambition, and symbolic pride collide with ordinary lives. A city became a battlefield partly because of its geography, but also because leaders refused to let it remain just a city. Its name mattered. Its factories mattered. Its river mattered. Its ruins mattered. And because of that, people were asked to survive conditions no one should have had to endure. When we reconstruct Stalingrad, we are not reconstructing glory. We are reconstructing a warning. A modern city can look permanent. It can seem solid, organized, almost indestructible. Streets, schools, apartments, factories, hospitals, markets, riverfronts. But war can transform all of it with terrifying speed. What was once built for life can become a machine for suffering. That is what happened here. Stalingrad began as an industrial city on the Volga. Bombing turned it into ruins. Street fighting turned those ruins into fortresses. Winter turned survival into a daily battle. Encirclement turned an army into a trapped population of starving men, and collapse turned the city into one of the defining symbols of the Second World War. So when we look at these reconstructions, I don't want us to see only soldiers, tanks, smoke, and destroyed buildings. I want us to see the city underneath, the homes that were there before, the workers who once walked into those factories, the civilians who hid below ground, the soldiers on both sides who found themselves inside a nightmare created by decisions far above them. Stalingrad was a turning point because armies shifted there, but it endures in memory because a city was pushed beyond the limits of what a city can be. What do you think matters more when we remember Stalingrad? The military victory, or the human cost hidden inside it? If you want to see more grounded reconstructions of history's most pivotal moments, subscribe to Edward Langford, Unseen History, and join me as we continue bringing the past back into view.